Hello, Excellencies, colleagues, friends, distinguished panelists, speakers. Welcome to the Generation Equality Forum and to this Action Coalition session on economic justice and rights. Can you all hear me? Give me a shout out. Good. My name is Winnie Byanyima. I'm the Executive Director of UNAIDS, and I'm honored to be your moderator today. Economic justice and rights is a topic close to my heart. I feel so passionate about it. We have 2 exciting hours ahead of us. We will hear from the leaders of the Action Coalition and from commitment makers who are determined to improve the lives of women and girls around the world through concrete, bold actions for economic justice and rights. We will welcome 30 speakers representing the many commitments coming in from stakeholders from all over the world. Before we begin, I'd like to share a couple of technical notes. We will be using the live chat as an interactive space, and we encourage you to submit comments and questions. Our team monitoring the chat will collate them, and I aim to get you to answer any questions in real time. So we will be answering questions in real time. This session is being recorded and will be available afterwards. With that, we will begin with the opening video, the Action Coalition motion story, which showcases the journey we have been on so far. So let's see it. Our opening speaker, my dear sister Phumzile Mlambo-Nyuka, Executive Director of UN Women. Phumzile, your leadership of the generation equality process has been absolutely inspirational, innovative, avant-garde. Thank you for joining us, Phumzile. Hi. Okay, Pumzile, I have two questions for you, and I'll ask them together at the same time. First, as we both know, the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing took place 26 years ago. What has changed since? Second question, our session here today is focused on economic justice and rights. What are the most pressing issues with this action, within this action coalition?
Winnie, and of course,
Pumzile, I can't hear you.
hello, can you hear me now?
A little better. Okay?
Is it better now? Can you hear me? Why don't you take your microphone?
Speak again.
Okay. Hello, can you hear me? They cannot hear her. Can you hear me now?
I hear you,
Yes.
but not
clearly.
so loudly.
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah. Let me say that what has changed since Beijing 26 years ago is the fact that we now have an army of women all over the world who are fighting for gender equality, who are focused on the issues that we raised in Beijing, which is why when we evaluated what we have done since 1995, we were able to aggregate and compare what has happened in different countries. We were obviously worried that progress has been slow and unequal. So that has been one of the challenges that were faced. Yes, lots of women mobilized, but the work that we needed to do is not where it is. There has not been as much support from government as we would have expected, because the investment in the areas that needed to be supported was not there. That is why one of the big issues of this conference is about investment. It is about enhancing the implementation of the Beijing Declaration. It is also about accelerating the implementation, and of course, we are also implementing SDGs, as well as now also responding to the pandemic. And to your second question, which is about what we are doing here today, we indeed are accelerating the implementation. We have brought together here multi-stakeholders. We have different governments. Mexico is here with me, together with France is the host. Mexico hosted us. Mexico, France is hosting us here. We have private sector, we have philanthropists, we have adolescents, we have youth, we have government, and we have anyone else who cares about this agenda. This is our effort to expand the team of people who are concerned with implementing this agenda. We also have identified 6 areas that we want to focus in, plus the 7th area, which is women, peace and security, and humanitarian action. But in economic transformation specifically, we are focusing on the care economy, which is an area of concern which has been exposed to us even much more during the pandemic. decent work. Most people who lost work during the pandemic were women, and part of the work we're going to do in this Action Coalition is to create work, productive resources, because it has been a historic challenge to enable women to be owners of products. And of course, an urgent transformation of economies. The macroeconomic policies that leave women out, taxation, for instance, is a big issue for us that must ensure that women are supported. And we also want to highlight the fact that the stimulus packages that government have voted in most countries are not reaching women. Women are in the informal sector, and therefore they do not have the papers that are required, and women do not have savings, so they do not see them through, and they are employed at the lower base of the economy. So it is very easy to dismiss them. They do not have contracts in the places where they work, so they do not have the possibility to claim their jobs back from their employers. So that's why we are here today. We want to address all of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Kumsile. I would now like to turn to leaders of the Economic Justice and Rights Action Coalition. For over a year, they have collectively developed the Global Acceleration Plan for Economic Justice and Rights, and I congratulate them on that. Now, along with hundreds of commitment makers, these leaders are ready to announce game-changing commitment to economic justice and rights under the 4 areas of action that Kumsile has just mentioned: the care economy, decent work, productive resources, and 4 gender transformative economies and stimulus packages. This is about addressing women's unequal location in the global economy, creating a level ground for women in our economies. But before we hear from the leaders, it is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Coronacion. Ms. Coronacion is the Deputy General Secretary for Centro. Centro is a national labor center and Ms. Coronacion is a youth representative from the Philippines. She will share some of the issues affecting her community and the solutions they've put in place to support rural and grassroots women. So let's see the video.
Women contribute enormously to the economy, but our work is undervalued. Wages remain very low in industries and sectors dominated by women, such as among teachers, nurses, and domestic workers. Women farmers and indigenous women have low income and lack access to resources. Unemployment is higher among women, and because of lack of local jobs and inadequate income, we are forced to migrate. Amid crisis and the pandemic, there are almost no support and protection for informal workers. Prices of food and necessities continue to rise. Rural and urban poor communities are threatened by demolition. Support is inadequate for victims of disasters and calamities. Hardship is worsened by various forms of violence in the homes, communities, farms, factories, and those coming from the state. Because of this, the government should pour energy towards rural development, especially in supporting local producers, creation of local employment program, living wage, adequate support services, support for care work, and upholding the rights of workers by implementing policies and programs that end the abuse and commodification of life.
Thank you so much, Ms. Coronacion, for sharing your story. your work. Dear participants, we will start with a segment on the care economy. While we hear the Action Coalition leaders, I would also like to ask you, the audience, to share your ideas and reactions. Put them through the chat function. I have a team who will collate your comments and answer any questions on the chat. So my question to all leaders for this segment on the care economy is this. Over the next 5 years, how will you contribute to transforming the care economy to address women's and girls' disproportionate share of care and domestic work, whether paid or unpaid? So it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Nadine Gassman, the President of the National Institute of Women of Mexico, or IMOJERES. Dr. Gassman, the floor is yours. I'm delighted to see you here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Good afternoon to all of you. It's a pleasure to be able to address all of you in this particular moment. And a pleasure for Zili. Pleasure to be here with you. I would like to address all of you as a co-leader of the Coalition for Action for Rights and Economic Justice. And I would like to tell you why my country has decided to turn to the Global Alliance for the Treatment of Women. As a country and as a society, Mexico is undergoing deep transformation. We're working to try and achieve substantive equality, and it's part of the policy of President López Obrador to really fight in depth inequalities, but we're already taking into account what has been said about how important it is that all of it is important after the pandemic. In terms of care, we have lived or we've gone through and seen the importance of investing in care, and we cannot carry on having women and girls working twice as much and not share the responsibilities that are the responsibilities and rights of all. And that is why in the framework of the forum I find myself and I feel very proud that we have launched the Global Alliance after launching the Fund of Mexico in March as a way of mobilizing the society to acknowledge and redistribute the care given to women. Now we know that we need to go towards society that pays attention to women. We need to ensure that we learn from one another, that we mobilize our efforts all together to acknowledge the importance of this as a matter of joint responsibility between governments, the private sector, civil society, and philanthropic institutions. The objective of the alliance is the following: is to put in on the public agenda the fact that we need to mobilize all of our efforts all together, and that we're working towards that. And we hope that all of us will be part of this great alliance that is going to bring together all of us and transform our society and work on it in the next 5 years. Thank you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. I'd now like to invite Mr. Ulrich Knudsen to the floor. Mr. Knudsen is the Deputy Secretary General of the OECD. Mr. Knudsen, please.
So I'm connecting from an iPad, so I have to start by asking if you can hear me. You are nodding.
I can hear you.
Thank you very much. Let me start by saying that the paid economy as well as the unpaid care economy, they're really driven by women. Women still do nearly twice as much unpaid work as men, and women also do the bulk of paid care work, often low paid and often with very low job quality. For example, women account for 90% of workers in the elderly care sector, a sector dominated by very poor working conditions, such as understaffing, low pay, and also, as you know, a high risk of injury. We've done here at the OECD work in this area, and it points really to ways that countries can transform the care economy and redress the gender imbalance. And let me give you just very briefly 3 short examples. First, gender stereotypes start early, and tackling them has to begin in schools. We have an example from Sweden where preschool curriculum now actively seeks to counteract traditional gender patterns and gender roles. Second, we also have to tackle social and economic gender norms around caring. Paid fathers' leave policies is one of the few direct policy levers available to policymakers to change the caring behavior of fathers. Almost 1/3 of OECD member countries now has reserved paid leave for fathers for a duration of at least 2 months. Paid leave and flexible work for unpaid carers could also be improved, allowing carers to combine work in a better way. Currently, only half of OECD countries provide paid leave to carers of sick relatives. Lastly, thirdly, we must improve the working conditions and pay for paid carers, where women make up a majority of workers. During the COVID-19 crisis, countries have made efforts to boost staff numbers and support workers. About 40% of OECD countries provided a one-off bonus to reward LTC workers of their exceptional efforts. The OECD is committed to improve gender balance in care work. We have a project called Beyond Applause. Remember when we were all applauding the care workers, starting this year, and it'll unpack how to improve working conditions, pay and care and career prospects in the long-term care sector. Next year, we'll also be reporting back on how far countries have come in implementing the OECD recommendations on gender equality. So we do believe that transformation of the care economy is indeed possible, and at the OECD we will continue to work very hard to help you deliver this change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Knut. Sorry, I didn't get your name right. I wanted to say thank you, Ulrich. I said it right. I think that now we can look to our developing countries. We've heard how countries from the industrialized world are addressing the OECD, working across their countries to address the issue of unpaid work, unpaid care work that's a burden to women, and that results in their lower participation in the economy and weaker benefits from the economy. So let's now go to a developing context, and I now want to invite Ms. Diane Darbawa, a youth leader and president of Monkey Maruf from Cameroon. Ms. Darbawa, please go ahead. Good, I can see you. The floor is yours, Diane.
Thank you very much. I hope you hear me.
Hear you.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. It's a great pleasure for me to be here with you today to talk about the recommendations of women and young girls of my community. Indeed, the situation in our country, which is a sub-Saharan country, is not easy for young women and young girls. In rural zones, as well as in cities, domestic, unremunerated, unpaid work often is the prerogative of women and young women, and therefore young girls, and therefore women face obstacles to realize their potential in society. It's really complicated to find work because they have to take care of work at home, take care of their families, their brothers, the field as well, and they do not benefit from all of this work. And we, as the young generation, we want to change the situation and mobilize our communities, mobilize our governments to have access to decent work and to also have our unpaid domestic work acknowledged. So we really are asking for strong commitment and a change in mentalities. And this must begin with young girls, with teenagers, and amongst the women. And to enable this change, we first want to change the mindsets of our religious leaders and our traditional leaders, and the mindset of our governments too, to finally have access to economic justice and to women's rights. In Cameroon, and particularly in the Sahel region. And for this to happen, we want to mobilize ourselves to raise awareness among the youth. We need to support them. We need further infrastructure, and we need to also support the most vulnerable young girls so that they become independent, so that they can fully realize their potential, and so that they can be productive in the future for themselves and for their communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Diane. So we've heard from the segment on the care economy. I thank you, Nadine, for raising the STAR framework, a powerful framework for addressing the unequal distribution of care work between men and women. They're recognizing, the first part to recognize by making visible, counting the care work through national systems of accounting. The second one on the redistribution, both the private sector and the public sector sharing more of the burden of care so that it's lifted off women. Childcare, publicly provided childcare, efficient public transportation, all these really free up women to engage in paid work, but also redistribution between men and women in their households. And this requires changing mindsets, the mobilization that Diane is talking about, tackling the social norms that make this work women's work and not men's work. So that's a redistribution. And the third is reward, compensating. Both the private sector and the public sector can compensate women for this work. So I'm happy that we've had those discussions. Let's now move on and introduce the decent work section. I'm so inspired to hear all the commitments emerging around the care economy. This really is a big barrier for women. This is so, and girls, and their opportunities. This is so important, never more so than now during COVID, as Kumzili reminded us. So now we are on decent work. Dear leaders, tell us, what concrete action will you take to expand decent work for women who are working in the formal and informal economies and address issues including social protection, that women at the bottom need, sexual harassment and discrimination, and pay equity. Let me introduce our speakers. The first speaker will be my dear sister and friend Sharon Barrow, General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation. Sharon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Winnie. And indeed, it's been too long since we sat together and strategized for the world we want to see. So it's great to be with you and all our other sisters. We are very far, you all know that, we're very far from realising equality. Whether it's of labour market participation, of equal pay or shared prosperity, or a fair share of the care burden, or of leadership positions in all walks of life. These are the things at the heart of economic and social justice, and we must really stand up. That whole army of women that you heard talked about joining forces across civil society, across women in leadership in all areas, and of course across trade unions, to drive change, transformational systems change that realise these ambitions. We can't leave people behind. So for working people, the ITUC and affiliate unions are demanding a new social contract for a just and resilient recovery. But the bulk of the ambitions is for women. We must have a new social contract that puts women and girls at the centre of a future that we can trust. So we have 5 key demands: jobs, jobs and jobs. They've got to be climate-friendly jobs because we already lived with the pre-existing crisis of the climate emergency and, of course, with massive inequality, including unemployment. A broken labour market where informality is now 60% of the world's labour market and 40% only in employment-related conditions, and then more than a third of them in precarity. So there've got to be, in fact, jobs everywhere. We know that in the transition to climate there are jobs, but we must create 575 million jobs by 2030 to return to full employment and meet the test of SDG 8. We must also formalise our target, at least 1 billion jobs in the informal economy. And the majority of these jobs have to be for women to achieve equal participation. We need to see, indeed, money allocated for jobs in care, just as we need jobs in climate enabling or green energy enabling infrastructure, or the transition of our economies and heavy industry. We need jobs in care. COVID-19 has shown you there's no resilience if you don't have health care, childcare, aged care, or indeed, let's just pay women if the systems aren't there but they're doing the care themselves in their homes and communities. Let's get it indeed, not just on the national accounts, but a minimum living wage or income in people's pockets. And we want these jobs to be rights-based. If we don't have decent work for women, then we are not offering women security or trust in a secure future. So we absolutely want to see a renewed fundamental rights commitment with OC health and safety, but we equally want the promise of the centenary declaration of the ILO, which would go a long way to repairing the social contract of rights, of indeed occupational health and safety as a fundamental right, particularly for care workers. We absolutely want to see minimum living wages or incomes for those not in formal work, and we want to see some control over working hours so women can balance their lives. This has to be married, Winnie, with universal social protection. That's the resilience that we absolutely demand. So with equality, income, gender, indeed race, but of course, as well as that, with inclusion. Inclusion, realising the SDGs, making sure that they work to put women and equality at the heart of a just future through a new social contract. and the reform of the multilateral system, which you and others are fighting so hard to achieve, to establish a new and just model of economy where everybody can hope that we will have a sustainable, inclusive and just future. We made three commitments: decent work for women, investment in care, and the safety of a working environment in our communities of a non-violent future with ratification and legal implementation with compliance of C190. Governments, corporations, they have to be committed, as we are, to economic and social justice for women and for working people in our communities. We want a new social contract.
Thank you, Sharon. You raised very good points, but go on, they speak and touch on the and I believe the because we will 40 points. My pleasure to introduce my neighbor here, my colleague in Geneva, Mr. Guy Ryder, the Director General of the International Labour Organization. We will hear from the Ryder via a video message.
COVID-19 brutally exposed the inequalities that existed in our world before the virus struck, and the pandemic made those inequalities worse. In the world of work, women have been disproportionately affected. They have suffered more losses in jobs and income, and almost all women have seen the hours that they spend on unpaid care work increase. Reports of violence and harassment have also increased, both at work and at home. This is unacceptable. It has no place in the world that we want. For 100 years, the International Labour Organization has stood for a more equal world of work, and we are honoured to be part of the Economic Justice and Rights Action Coalition and to be a commitment maker. Now we call for a transformative agenda for gender equality, without discrimination, where women have an equal right to work and rights at work, where there is zero tolerance for violence and harassment. The ILO's 187 member states have issued a global call to action on recovery from the COVID-19 crisis, and it says that recovery must be human-centred. And we must do more to prevent violence and harassment, including in the world of work. 2 years ago, the ILO's constituents, governments, employers and workers adopted a groundbreaking international standard on violence and harassment at work, Convention number 190. And Convention 190 says that there is no place for violence and harassment in the world of work. And today I give you a clear commitment to deliver on that promise. In the coming 5 years, the ILO will intensify efforts to advocate for and support the ratification and effective implementation of Convention number 190 and Recommendation 206 that accompanies it. We will build up our knowledge on violence and harassment in the world of work, including global statistics regarding its prevalence, with a view to developing an international benchmark. And we will help our member states to eliminate violence and harassment by addressing its root causes and developing inclusive, integrated and gender-responsive approaches. And I call on you to join with us. Together we can build a decent, dignified, safe and healthy working life for all.
Thank you, Guy. So Sharon and Guy, out there an agenda that we must take and fight on going forward. Sharon, thank you for raising the issue of formality. That 60% of jobs today are informal. Workers have lost rights in the workplace due to informalization. Nobody raised the issue of jobs in care. That's a huge opportunity. Where we see technology displacing workers in some sectors like finance, like manufacturing. If care were to be rewarded, there are millions of jobs that can be created in the care sector, and that would go to women and men too, but mostly women will gain because of their education in their work. So thank you for that. I also heard Guy touch on a very important issue of violence, harassment in the workplace. That is an agenda that we must take forward coming 25 years after Beijing. This is an issue that's still with us. That violence that women experience in the household follows them also in the workplace. That harassment, sexual harassment, all kinds of harassment still exists. Convention 190 that Guy has committed to give reality to, get ratifications and get it into force is a very important one for us. I cannot end without mentioning a minimum living wage. Millions of women around the world are not working. They are working, they are exploited, they are not paid a fair wage. That is a battle. The gender wage gap still exists across the world. That is a battle from Beijing, from before Beijing, from all the world conferences of women that we must continue. I thank you, Sharon. I thank you, Guy, your two leaders. I so admire in this struggle for economic justice for women. I now move on to the section on productive resources. I'm excited by the potential for change that these commitments that have been gathered carry. I start with Ms. Mela Gamboa. Ms. Gamboa is a member of the executive board of the General Union of Independent Workers and Informal Economy Workers, representing women street vendors. And she's also a member of the National Youth Team of CUT, C-U-T, in Colombia. Ms. Gamboa will share some of the issues affecting the women in her community. Please play her video.
Hi, my name is Pamela Gamboa. I'm part of the team of young informal workers in Colombia. And today in Colombia, the situation of the youth and of the women is quite dramatic. Close to 65% of the population in age of working is working in situations that are ephemeral. And you have high levels of unemployment amongst women and youth. 20%, 33% of the youth don't study and don't work, and this is the consequence of the economic model that has been implemented in Colombia over the past 30 or 40 years, which instead of privileging national production in agriculture or fisheries has been dedicated to developing foreign capital and through the OECD. So in order to find a solution to the problems faced by youth and the women, we need to have a permanent criticism and a permanent mobilization against the neoliberal economic model that prevails in Colombia, but also in Latin America. So we have to call upon the youth and the women to organize ourselves in our own organizations to represent our rights in trade unions and to defend our rights and to defend our national production and most of all to defend the sovereignty of our own countries.
Thank you, Pamela, for your inspiring experience. Now we will hear from the leaders who are going to speak to us about securing access to and control over productive resources for women and girls. This is a question for them. What, in your opinion, constitute the most critical productive resources that have the potential to achieve economic rights and autonomy. How do you plan to achieve this for women and girls over the next 5 years? It's my honor and privilege to welcome His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa. Your Excellency, let me first express all our gratitude for your leadership, both in Africa and globally, during this ongoing COVID-19 pandemic that's ravaging your country and other countries on our continent, Africa. Congratulations on the recent establishment of the Commission on African COVID-19 response. The world is indebted to you. And let me say this, that you are a leader who's crisscrossed the three sectors that are critical here. You've been a trade union leader, a business leader, now a government leader. I'm honored to welcome you to this session of the Generation Equality Forum. You now have the floor, Your Excellency. Issue with the President, so we're going to pass on to the next speaker as that is being corrected. So I'm delighted to invite our next speaker, Ms. Violet Chibukwe. I've had the privilege to know Violet, a leader from the grassroots, fighting for women's rights and women's voices in global decision-making. Ms. Chibukwe is the chair of the Governing Council for Wairo Commission, a global grassroots women's organization. Wairo Commission is a network that is close to my heart, with many friends there. I'm delighted to see you here. Violet from Kakamega, Kenya. Please, you have the floor.
I'm here.
One who is listening to today. And I just want to start by appreciating that we began our work in advanced caregiving because of the support we got from you, Winnie, when you were in UNTP to carry out a research that revealed how much contribution the classes women were doing in caregiving. So I'll go to my presentation. So Wairo Commission is a grassroots women-led social movement of 101 community-based organizations working in urban, rural, and indigenous poor communities in 42 countries. Proudly, we announce our 5-year commitment to improve their livelihoods, economic opportunity, and living conditions of our members and communities alongside government development agencies implementing multi-year economic stimulus plans to redress the damage of a global health pandemic. Our network has established an impressive track record in the 25 years since convening the grassroots tent at the Civil Society Women's Conference in China in Beijing to demonstrate that grassroots women groups were empowered, developing their communities, and have an important place in the women's movement for gender equality, equitable development, and human rights. The social and political capital and collective power we have built in 2.5 decades comes from the strong links across our grassroots constituencies, our strong allies who share our commitment to supporting social change from the bottom up. Today, our 101 women-led member groups span farmers, associations, producer cooperatives, housing and informal settlement federations, national network of community caregiving associations, and contribute a diversity of skills, allies, and policy priorities, with 2 men-led NGOs, which are Start Our Movement builds upon established strategic partnership with local, sub, and national governments and key developing agencies to advance our agendas. And I'll go to our commitments. Our commitments to accelerate gender equality, grassroots women economic empowerment, and gender just development to 226 are grounded in an integrated constituency-based approach. In the context of Generation Equality Forum and Global Accelerator pledges, our global movement has been a thought leader and commitment leader maker of the Economic Justice Action Coalition, substance, productive resources, decent work, and care economy. Hence, today, our premier commitment relates to productive resources, where we pledge to accelerate grassroots women access to and control over productive resources, targeting land property, pledging ourselves to formal support 150,000 grassroots women acquire title deeds. Additionally, we will sustain our participation in the Coalition of Land Alliance, where Wairu Commission has shared tools enabling grassroots women groups to claim their land property rights and join Stand for Her Land and other campaigns. In the decent work, we pledge to support grassroots women organizations in 10 countries to access equality market via stronger value chains and procurement opportunities, and strengthen women's small business in order to restore and improve women's livelihood and income. Finally, I'm particularly proud to share our commitment to the Global Alliance on Care, which focuses on repressing inequality in the economy and ensuring equitable pandemic recovery policies. In this domain, Wairu will support our members in 42 countries to produce evidence-based research and community data, documenting and valorizing the care work they have performed during the epidemic, health care support, food security, assisting children and elderly, and others, not only for our own family, but also to support neighbors in the dire need. Their research will become a key plank of Wairu's 5-year grassroots women COVID-19 recovery platform, which has been established to ensure grassroots women groups are supported to frame and claim recovery and stimulus opportunities locally, nationally, and seize a historical moment to ensure flat economic growth. Policies are replaced with equitable, feminist ones focused on creating security, decent pay, and work for grassroots women worldwide. To learn about our climate resilience commitment and other details, I urge you to please visit our website, which we invite you to join, and I'll share it in the chat. Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Violet. A little publicity for Wairu Commission isn't bad either. I understand that now President Cyril Ramaphosa is ready. Welcome, President Ramaphosa. I had introduced you, but I'm going to reintroduce you briefly. I mentioned that you are a leader who can speak on this topic from many angles, having once been a trade union leader, a business leader, and now a government leader. You can speak to this issue from many angles. But most of all, I thank you so much for your leadership now in this context of COVID, fighting so hard in your country that's facing a harsh, aggressive virus today, as well as so many others in Africa. And I thank you for being the voice of the developing countries on equity for a vaccine and for a chance for the whole world to recover from this health and economic crisis. So I want to pass the floor to you. The question I asked to all the participants was, and I believe it was given to you, let me just repeat it just in case. Oh, I'm so sorry now. Yes, the question was, what in your opinion constitutes the most critical productive resources that have the potential to achieve economic rights and autonomy for women? How do you plan to achieve it for women and girls for the next 5 years? Over to you, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, my sister Winnie. And I'd like to extend my greetings to Honorable Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, the Executive Director of UN Women, and Excellencies who are here, various heads of organizations, and ladies and gentlemen. We are brought together in this forum by a shared determination that no woman should be denied the rights, the opportunities and resources that are required for a secured, just and prosperous life. South Africa is committed to both supporting and implementing the actions contained in the Global Acceleration Plan for Economic Justice and Rights. Our interventions must dismantle the systemic barriers that marginalize women and girls and perpetuate inequality in the global economy. In South Africa, we are working to shift economic power into the hands of women through a number of initiatives. And one of those that are really key is earmarking 40% of all public procurement for women-owned businesses. And as we speak, a lot of training is ongoing for women to be able to take up this important opportunity that will change their lives in many ways. On the African continent, we are working towards adopting a protocol and program of action on women in trade to promote the participation of women in the African Continental Free Trade Area. This is a free trade area that came into operation the 1st of January of this year. We are working to ensure access for women to productive resources through financial inclusion, an area that women have always been excluded from. Because lack of access to financial services and products disproportionately affects poorer women working in the informal sector, particularly those without income and those who are illiterate. Lack of access to financial resources increases vulnerability to economic shocks and may, in some cases, even increase exposure to gender-based violence. Innovation in digital financial services in Africa offers an opportunity for rapid scale-up of financial services and products that can be made available to women. We're working in partnership with Queen Maxima, the UN Secretary General Special Advocate on Financial Inclusion. We are committed to establishing the Advocacy Accelerator for Women's Digital Financial Inclusion on the African continent. This initiative will mobilize stakeholders to invest in new platforms and products to increase access to digital financial products and services for women on the African continent. Now, much of what we are doing, particularly in South Africa, is inspired by one of the pioneers of women's empowerment in South Africa, who is called Charlotte Maxeke. And Charlotte Maxeke was one of the leading women, particularly in our struggle against apartheid. And we are launching the Charlotte Maxeke Women's Initiative on Economic Justice and Rights. This will involve collaborative projects to increase opportunities for women and girls in areas of entrepreneurship, of leadership, as well as diplomacy. Through these efforts, through this global acceleration plan, we are moving ever closer to realizing our goal of economic justice and rights for women. This is an area that we are determined to work effectively around, because we want to make sure that the exclusion of women and girls in economic activity becomes history. They deserve to be at the forefront of economic inclusion and economic activity in more ways than one. I would like to say that the era of women to participate meaningfully in the economies of their countries is now. And all of us must work together to ensure that this dream that the women of our various countries have is truly realized. My sister Winnie, I thank you for this opportunity, and I hope through this I've answered your question in some ways. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, Your Excellency. Your comments touch the heart of the matter, that the weakness of women in our economies is wired in the structures of the economy and in society. And unless systemic barriers are tackled, women's inequality in the economy remains. Thank you for your commitment. Giving women affirmative action in the economy through public procurement, powerful, it works. And maybe I'm going to ask for a South African passport and learn business skills and come to get the opportunity myself. But it's a powerful tool you're using. Public policy, empower women. Thank you for the commitment on a women in trade protocol in the Africa Free Trade area and financial inclusion that touches at the heart of women's ability to run businesses and to protect themselves from economic and other shocks, and including gender-based violence. Before that, we have had a good contribution from a global women's grassroots organization making commitments to fight on women's land rights and bring this across the country to work here. So now we're going to move on. I want to thank you and move on to our next speaker, who is Ms. Preeti Sinha. Ms. Sinha is the Executive Secretary for the United Nations Capital Development Fund. And Ms. Sinha will tell us what this particular fund does and make commitments for the next 5 years. Preeti, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Winnie, and distinguished guests. I'm very grateful to be here today and talk about the commitments that the UN Capital Development Fund would like to make to the Generational Equality Forum, along with all the inspiring and inspirational speakers that have gone on before me. So the UN Capital Development Fund works on last-mile financing, particularly in the least developed countries. And we look to unlock resources on public and private finance to reduce poverty and support local economic development. And we hope through our work we truly embody the UN's spirit and we bring the task of financing in our work in the LDCs. So in that vein, the UN Capital Development Fund is very excited to be part of the GEF, and our contribution is to create equal economies, where women will have equal access, equal agency, and equal leadership. UNCDF will work in partnership with public, private, and civil society actors to unlock the capital required, both financial and the human capital, as well as promoting enabling policies that help women in LDC. We will implement our vision to create equalities by working to achieve two sets of commitments. The first, to achieve gender finance gap zero, and second, to achieve red tape zero. Through our gender finance gap zero commitment, UNCDF pledges to narrow the finance gap that contributes equal opportunities for women's advancement across a range of spheres. Under the red tape zero, we will commit to address the deep-rooted systemic biases as well as the market and agency constraints for women that often serve as literal and figurative threat for women's advancement and empowerment. These commitments are very deeply embedded in our approach to achieving women's economic rights through new and innovative financing mechanisms, strong leadership, and local voice in decisions. It's a market-based approach and partnership between the public and private sector, closely aligned to the priorities of the economic justice and rights and the technology and innovation action coalition. To reach these ambitious commitments, we recognize the pivotal importance of strong collaboration with all our partners and the GEF co-leaders. To this extent, we are also proud of our participation in two other collective commitments. The first, UNCDF has joined the 2X Collaborative, through which we will contribute to promoting gender-lensed investing in emerging markets, to innovative blended financing solutions and partnerships with capital providers to develop new financing mechanisms to support women SMEs. UNCDF will utilize its comprehensive toolkit, including impact matrices on gender investments, developing partnerships with UNDP and even women to support this work. Secondly, we have joined the Digital Liquidity Outcome Fund with the Government of Finland, UNICEF, and Volta Capital, through which we will continue our work to advance innovative financing as a means of closing the gender-digital divide. In line with going from commitment to action, I'm also proud to announce the launch of the Digital Economies and Gender Playbook yesterday. It was launched. This is a tool to help implementers in the field better understand and address market constraints towards making women builders of digital economy. This is an important tool for leaders, presidents who have made contributions to our joint Reaching Financial Equity Advocacy campaign, which we do in collaboration with the Better Than Cash Alliance, the UN Secretary General's Special Advocate, Queen Maxima, UN Women, Women's World Banking, and the World Bank. And equally announce our commitment to utilize our financing tools to support infrastructure and essential services in growing urban areas to promote equal economic opportunity and safety for women, youth, slum dwellers, minorities, and other marginalized groups in initiatives called Increase City and Others. In our vision to create equal economy through our commitments to achieve gender finance gap zero and red tape zero, and reinforced by our collaborative commitment to the 2X Collaborative and the Digital Literacy Equity Outcome Fund, I'm pleased to commit these to the forum today for a great partnership to achieve that. We feel these commitments will impact women and their families in the LDCs particularly, allowing them to have equal access, equal agency, and equal leadership in their societies and economies. So thank you, Winnie, for the opportunity, and I'd like to commit to UNCDF's commitment to the Generation Equality Forum.
Thank you, Preeti, for your commitment. I now want to move us to our next speaker, who is Mr. Franz Paci, PayPal's Senior Vice President, Chief Corporate Affairs Officer. France, you're welcome. You have the floor. You're the first to speak here from the private sector. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And I want to extend my thanks and on behalf of the entire PayPal community to UN Women and the governments of Mexico and France for convening the Generation Equality Forum. We're so honored to engage in this important initiative and this dialogue with everyone involved here at the forum today and tuning in all around the world. We're working together to advance a shared vision for a more equitable global economy through measurable initiatives and commitments and action. And it's through this kind of cross-sector collaboration that we will focus on outcomes and will leverage our core capabilities and resources to deliver meaningful and sustainable impact as we work to bolster the financial health of women and girls all around the world. For PayPal, this work is deeply aligned with our mission to democratize financial services and to help create greater economic opportunity for unbanked and underserved individuals, the majority of whom around the world are women. The economic and social impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic have only further exacerbated long-standing disparities that we're working to address. We see that progress has been set back and has resulted in an even more urgent need to prioritize gender equality as we move to work for an inclusive economic recovery. As a fintech company and in our capacity as the private sector leader for the Economic Justice and Rights Action Coalition, we are committed to drawing on our global digital payments platform and our core capabilities to advance sustainable development goals, especially SDG 5. Over the next 5 years, we'll take the following actions to realize and fulfill this commitment. PayPal will be contributing $1 million to raise awareness and provide incentives to mobilize donations to civil society organizations that support gender equality through our PayPal Giving Fund. As part of this effort, we'll recruit gender equality-focused charities to our donation platform in at least 34 countries to advance resource mobilization for SDG 5. We'll also draw on our employee community, whose commitment to this work is deep and broad. I want to especially thank the members of PayPal's Unity Employee Resource Group, an employee community of women and allies who are working on our commitments and building our PayPal community, and who have tuned in to this session from around the world. Through our Community Impact Program, we are setting a goal of 10,000 employee volunteer hours of capacity building and skill-based volunteer services to advance gender equality. These initiatives will build on our additional commitments, which include depositing $100 million of capital into investment funds and depository institutions that are led by women or focused on serving women. We will invest $7 million in partnerships to increase access to microloans for women entrepreneurs around the world. We will conduct assessments within PayPal to ensure that our company's policies and benefits regarding pay equity, paid leave, caregiver support, and workplace sexual harassment prevention meet or exceed best practices. We are going to make sure that we walk the talk within PayPal. We're going to contribute resources and expertise to Data 2X, a collaborative technical and advocacy program, so that we can help on working to improve the availability, quality, and use of gender data. All of these actions are designed with a deep commitment to collaboration and partnership, which is a core tenet of PayPal's strategy, and I know also a perspective and approach shared by our Action Coalition colleagues. To conclude, I just want to say that together, with consistent and deliberative collective action to give women greater access to and agency over their financial services, we will lay a foundation for a more resilient and equitable economy. Thank you very much for having me here today.
Thank you very much, Franz. Your commitments are concrete, are measurable, and are transformative. Thank you. I'd now like to invite Ms. Sofia Sprechman-Sneiro, the Secretary General of CARE International. Sofia, you have the floor. I'm delighted to have you here.
Thank you, Winnie. Thank you, UN Women, and thanks to the governments of Mexico and France for convening the Gender Equality Forum in collaboration with civil society. Thank you for including civil society. It is wonderful to join this esteemed panel and represent CARE International. With CARE, we are very clear about what the most critical productive resources for gender justice are. Because over the last decade, we have been accompanying and learning from some of the most marginalized women as they've become powerful economic and social actors. The secret to this transformation has been village savings and loan associations. These savings groups are self-managed groups of 15 to 25 people, mostly women, who meet regularly to save money together so they can access all loans and emergency insurance. Over the last 20 years, CARE has facilitated saving groups for 8.4 million people, mostly women, across 51 countries. We know they are incubators of women's leadership. They empower women to tackle problems well beyond financial exclusion, like maternal and child health, sexual and reproductive health, education, gender-based violence, women's political representation. During COVID-19, savings groups have helped to build forward rather than just build back. Women in savings groups all over the world stepped up to offer solutions in their own communities. When most economies were in crisis and unable to provide safety nets, women who had built up networks, leadership experience, and shared trust in the saving group were able to act together to cope better with the impacts of the pandemic. Today, I am proud to announce that CARE commits to support at least 10 million women and girls to strengthen existing saving groups and form new ones that will advance local, women-led economic justice and rights initiatives. Over the next 5 years, we will do this through our own programming and by partnering with 10 African governments and select private sector actors to integrate and support the savings groups model through policies and programs. And of course, we will promote digital means, which are critical, as indicated by President Ramaphosa. This will help reduce the number of unbanked women and strengthen social protection policies, two goals in the Global Accelerator Plan. Accountability to the communities and women we work with will also be central to this commitment. I want to share the words of Tani Maria from the Saving Group in Nigeria. She said, "We are no longer afraid. We can speak in front of any assembly. If it is a question of defending our rights and our cause, I will defend our interests, whatever the cost, and by our own means." It is this kind of grassroots leadership that we need on a global scale. We are to shift the dial on women's economic justice and prevent COVID-19 from rolling back progress on gender equality by generations. We, of course, also need policy commitments by governments and support from the private sector for decent work for women and for building a caring economy. Yet at the very center of the transformation must be the leadership and solidarity of women and women's groups. Thank you, Winnie.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophia. Your words are inspiring, your commitments are also real. I now want to move on and let us now hear from Mr. Mark Guzman, the Chief Executive Officer of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I've worked with Mark. I know how passionate you are about gender justice and gender equality. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome you here today, and I look forward to hearing your intervention. You have the floor.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Winnie. And yes, you and I have walked many long paths together, and it's inspiring to be able to be at a moment like this forum today and to see this impressive set of commitments and, more importantly, the energy and the mobilization that we have across all these key sectors: government, the private sector, the multilateral, civil society, because that is really the essence of what both the process and this economic justice and rights coalition that we've been very proud to be part of has put in motion, saying that we see the opportunity and the need. You don't need me speaking at the end of this very distinguished group to repeat the statistics, where we know the challenges are very real for women, and particularly have been made more acute by COVID, but the opportunities are even greater. That we cannot meet the SDGs broadly, we cannot meet our poverty reduction goals, our agricultural productivity goals, our financial inclusion goals, without a deep, deliberate focus on gender and women. And that is why we are very proud, as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to be announcing today $650 million in additional new commitments in the economic justice and rights section. We will be focusing primarily on digital financial inclusion, building on what you've heard from UNCDF, from President Ramaphosa, from CARE, from PayPal, all of whom are proud partners in this, because we see this as a transformative platform that allows women both access into savings, other resources, credit, a financial basis they're able to invest in their families, in entrepreneurship, building up economies and societies, and the moment is now. We also will be making significant new investments in women's empowerment collectives, because those are such a proven mechanism across Africa and Asia for building community and building and sharing resources and training and access to government services and other support. And last but not least, we are also going to be making an investment in support with the World Bank and others to really help expand and support for caregiving resources in developing countries across Africa and Asia. Because again, we've heard from the previous section, and that's how much of a barrier that is to women being able to be full participants in the economy. And so our hope is that this combination of actions, and I really want to stress it as a combination of actions that will be done in partnership with everyone else who's spoken on this panel today, and many, many others across the private sector, public sector, and civil society around the world, But the key is that these are going to be concrete, measurable commitments that have to make a fundamental difference in women's lives, and we look forward to working with all of you to make that a reality in the years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. This is truly exciting. The commitments, again, are real, are concrete, are measurable, and transformative. And I like the fact that we've now heard from quite a range of partners, actors, from governments, civil society, grassroots movements, philanthropy, private sector. We're seeing a coalescing of action from the grassroots to the global level. This is exciting. It's my pleasure now to welcome the final speaker for this segment, Dr. Maria Flashbach, who is the Parliamentary State Secretary at the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development for the government of Germany. I know Maria. I've had the honor, the privilege to collaborate with her, and I also know how passionate and deep you are on the question of gender justice. You have the floor, Maria.
Thank you very much, Winnie, for this very, very nice and friendly introduction, and it's a pleasure for me seeing you again. So, Excellencies, coalition partners, distinguished colleagues, I'm very impressed by the transformative initiatives that have been presented. They show the many ways in which we can foster women's access to productive resources. Equal access to productive resources acts as a catalyst because it increases women's independence and negotiating power in all areas of life. In order to bring that catalytic effect to life, Germany focuses on education, women entrepreneurs, and access to land. Through various signature projects, we address the fundamental barriers in these fields that prevent women and girls from using their full potential and that stands in the way of their economic success. For example, in preparation of the Generation Equality Summit, we recently launched the Support Her Education, SHE initiative for girls' education under the umbrella of the Global Partnership for Education. We are providing 100 million euros in support of this initiative. And through the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative, WeFi, we are providing access to finance for over 130,000 women entrepreneurs in more than 60 countries, thus enabling them to realize their ideas. As announced by Chancellor Merkel yesterday, we will increase our contribution to WeFi by another 25 million euros so that even more women can set up or expand their own entrepreneurships. Last not least, we are working for giving women equal access to land. We support relevant activities in 9 partner countries, including in cooperation with the Stand for Her Land campaign. In total, we are providing more than 30 million euros for women's land rights. But we can only achieve economic empowerment and justice for women if we join forces. All the 3 initiatives are suitable for collective commitments. So I would like to appeal to you to join these initiatives and play an active and creative role, sharing your ideas and experience. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. I now would like to invite, and I'm changing a little on my program, but bear with me. It's my pleasure to next introduce Ms. Anne Lane, the Honorable Minister for Foreign Affairs for the government in Sweden. Welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you very, very much. Excellencies, friends, co-leaders of the Action Coalition, and participants around the world. Sweden is a global champion for gender equality and a proud co-leader of the Action Coalition on Economic Justice and Rights. In this capacity, Sweden has pushed for rights and gender perspective in the COVID-19 response. We know that women and girls in the world have been severely affected by the crisis, not least by increased gender-based violence. Still, the gender perspective is often disregarded in the crisis response. We cannot let this crisis become a recession for women and girls. That is why Sweden has pushed for this on all arenas. In my role as chairperson in office of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, gender equality in the COVID response, women, peace and security, and women's economic empowerment have been important priorities. Ladies and gentlemen, gender equality has been central to Sweden's development as a welfare state. This is a matter of human rights and of democracy. Key Swedish reforms include separate income tax, public child and elderly care, and gender-neutral parental leave. These reforms have contributed to a high labour market participation, to women's economic empowerment, economic prosperity, and gender equality. We need to increase gender equality on the labour market and implement the decent work agenda. This includes social dialogue. When partners on the labour market dialogue and negotiate, gender equality can be strengthened. The Swedish initiative Global Deal, hosted by OECD and ILO, is an effort in this regard. I'm very proud that Sweden in 2014 was the first country in the world to announce a feminist foreign policy with the aim to strengthen women's and girls' rights, representation and resources. This policy has had a significant influence and other countries have followed suit. I would also like to take the opportunity to highlight gender and trade. We need to ensure that trade benefits women equally to men. This is why Sweden in 2019, when I was a Minister of Trade actually, proclaimed a feminist trade policy. In addition to all these broad commitments, I would like today to announce that Sweden this year is contributing more than 16 million euro to counteract men's violence against women and girls, nationally and internationally, and more than 45 million euro to support women's rights organizations internationally. These works include work against prostitution and trafficking in human beings for sexual purposes. Sweden is also signatory to the Women, Peace and Security and Humanitarian Action Compact that we have been part of developing in synergy with the Action Coalition. We commit to advance women's meaningful participation through advocacy and through support to women mediators, and we will deliberate on our actions to further accelerate our work at a later point. To conclude, Sweden is proud to be a part of the Generation Equality Initiative. No peace, sustainable development or economic growth can be achieved if we disregard half of the world's population. Let this generation be an equal generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If I can call you Anne, Your Excellency. I'm using an informal approach with everyone. We have now reached the end of that section, and we are about to move to the inclusive economy section. But we are hearing really exciting messages because we're hearing commitments on inclusive finance, access of women to finance, to skills and education, to land, We also hear in tackling the hidden barriers, like the unproportional burden of unpaid care work that women face through public policies and through private sector policies. And we're hearing about women's equality, addressing the gender wage gap, commitments in a range of areas that if the commitments are fulfilled, we will see real change. I thank you all, the speakers, in this last session of productive resources. We now move to inclusive economies. Now, we turn towards the macro level and hear from leaders about their commitments towards gender transformative economies. My question to the next leaders is this. Over the next 5 years, how do you plan to shift the global economic system towards one that is gender responsive, gender equal, including considerations for economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic? To start, it is my honor to introduce His Excellency, Mr. Pedro Sanchez, President of the Government of Spain, who will deliver his message via video. President Sanchez is a champion for fighting inequality. I've participated in a global event making commitments to reduce inequality. Spain has been one of the countries to embrace a feminist foreign policy, just like Sweden. And only yesterday, the Spanish Parliament took brave steps forward in trans and gender choice legislation. I'm delighted now that we can hear from President Sanchez. Let's listen to him.
Desde hace 26 años, la Plataforma de Acción y Declaración de Pekín han guiado nuestros esfuerzos para lograr sociedades más igualitarias. Hoy en el Foro Generación Igualdad renovamos nuestros compromisos, conscientes de que queda muchísimo camino por recorrer.
If women do not participate in all policy making, there will be no economic justice, no sustainable growth, and no prosperity. Spain wants to lead by example. So today I'm pleased to announce several commitments that we will assume for the coming years. First, Spain's Recovery, Transformation and Resilience Plan, we will carry out investments in connection with the UN reform aimed at closing the gender gap, including the gender pay gap. We will adopt measures to improve digital training, foster women's entrepreneurship and promote women's participation in the labor market with measures such as the co-responsive and the development of the care economy. Second, the recent law on climate change and energy transition and the just transition strategy mainstream gender and aim to respond to the unequal effect of climate change on women and girls. We will promote women's green entrepreneurship and their participation in the development of public policies.
En tercer lugar,
Thirdly,
la cooperación española,
our
que ha
development
convertido a la
policy,
igualdad de género
which
en su
has put
seña
gender
identidad.
equality at the
Hace
forefront
más
of
de
its
10 años
efforts. More than
España
10
apoyó
years
la
ago,
creación de ONU
Spain
Mujeres,
supported the creation
que ha
of
logrado
UN
avances
Women, which has
evidentes para
enabled
millones de
progress
mujeres y
for
niños.
millions of
Ahora,
women and girls.
lo que pretende
Now,
la cooperación española
Spain's
es
development
sumarse
policy
al plan de aceleración
aims
global
to
a
join
través de
the
dos fondos,
global
el Fondo Ellas
acceleration
Plus,
plan through two
con un
funds,
presupuesto
ELS
inicial de
Plus Fund, with
1,45
an
millones de
initial
euros
budget of
para el año
1.45
2021,
million euros
que
for
impulsa la
2021
participación efectiva
to
de las
promote the
mujeres
effective
en la
political
vida política
participation
de forma
of
global.
women.
Y en segundo lugar, el
And
fondo
secondly, the
con un presupuesto de 4 millones
DUC
de euros
fund,
para
with a budget of 4
que trata de
million
reducir la
euros
brecha
for
digital
2021
en educación.
to aim at
Y
reducing
por
the
otro lado,
digital gap.
uno de los
On the
retos,
other hand,
yo
one
diría,
of
más
the most
acuciantes al que nos
pressing
enfrentamos
challenges we
es,
face
sin duda
is,
alguna, la violencia de género.
without a shadow of
Una
doubt,
lacra
gender-based
agravada
violence, a dreadful reality exacerbated by COVID-19, and the Spanish government has allocated an additional 180 million euro under the budget to face this issue. And in addition, Spain is ratifying the International Labour Organization's Convention number 119 to make sure that women can carry out their work in an environment free of violence.
Y por último, quisiera
Finally, I would like to mention two sectors particularly affected by the COVID-19 crisis.
Por un lado,
on the one hand, I'm referring to the health sector, in which women represent more than 50% of healthcare workers in Spain.
Por eso, mi país aplaude
And that is why Spain applauds and joins the Gender Equal Health and Care Workforce initiative promoted by France to give more visibility to the role of nurses, doctors, pharmacists, and other health professionals in the sector.
Y también nos sumamos
we also joined the letter of commitment for culture to fight sexist representations, violence, and sexual and gender-based harassment in the film industry, radio, television, music, video games, advertising, as well as in literature and toys. Anything that has to do with culture. I would like to conclude by thanking all of the people involved for your enormous efforts to reach conclusions that can have a real impact on the lives of women and girls, and that inspires us to need to move forward decisively towards effective equality in our societies between men and women. Thank you.
Thank you, President. Your Excellency, your commitments are real, are measurable, are concrete, and they touch both the hidden barriers as well as the more visible barriers to women's economic empowerment. I now would like to move on, thank you, President, to our next speaker, who is Ms. Laura Huertas-Thompson. Ms. Huertas, small change. I have missed my next speaker. Sorry about that. My next speaker is Miss Memory Kachambwa. Memory Kachambwa is the Executive Director of our outstanding feminist network in Africa called Feminet. In full, it is the African Women's Development and Communication Network, one of the earliest pioneer women's rights network on the continent. Memory, you're welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Winnie, and it's so great to see you in this space. We know you are passionate about economic justice. It's a great honor to be part of the core leaders of the Economic Justice and Rights Action Coalition. Femnet is the African Women's Development and Communications Network, a feminist network with diverse members, activists, women's rights organizations, over 800 in 50 African countries and the diaspora. We know that economic policy making is all about making political choices, which really determines who benefits and who loses in the distribution of resources. And those who usually control these choices, they've systematically excluded women, particularly those from historically marginalized groups, and justify this exclusion by presenting economics as a very technical and complex discipline beyond the understanding of most people. And this has really had an effect on obscuring the highly political nature of the choices that are being made. We find that women are not at the table where macroeconomic issues are being made. And as Femnet, we have prioritized unpacking these macroeconomic issues for inclusive economies and also proposing alternative feminist economies. So we have prioritized and joined the global tax movement for transparency and a gender-just tax system. So tax is one of the priorities. We have prioritized issues of debt, which is a clear generational issue. And we are keen that women and girls in all their diversities are campaigning for responsible debt, that does not trap us for generation in a cycle of poverty. We need to be on the decision making. It is part of what what is important to us and our economies, particularly on the African continent. We also need to ensure that investment is going towards public services, education, health, social protection, sexual reproductive health and rights to ensure dignity for African women and girls. The fourth issue that we have prioritized is the care economy. And the last macroeconomic issue that we'll focus on in the next 5 years is ending illicit financial flows from Africa. And to this end, we ensure that women are loud and clear in the Stop the Bleeding campaign from Africa. We know that Africa loses approximately 50 billion annually through illicit financial flows. And the AU ECA high-level panel on illicit financial flows reports and other studies argue that Africa loses close to $1 trillion through illicit financial flows in the past 50 years. And this is an amount similar to the official development assistance in the same period. So in this consortium where we are talking about Stop the Bleeding from Africa, our shared vision is African citizens living in dignity in a just, integrated, prosperous Africa that equitably and sustainably harnesses its resources and is underpinned by strong and effective institutions. So in summary, in the next 5 years, FEMNET will commit, number one, to mobilize and strengthen the capacities of African women and girls in all their diversities in policy advocacy so that they are able to influence these macro-level economic policies, and to make sure there is transformation and to ensure that there is equitable and sustainable distribution of resources. And we'll do this through our flagship African Feminist Macroeconomic Academy. And we want to extend and scale it up to also include African teenage girls, young women, women political leaders, and non-binary persons to be part of a pool of analytical, passionate advocates of feminist macroeconomic policies and practices across generations. And we want to co-develop alternative economic models that are just, equitable, sustainable, and feminist. The second commitment is we want to expand our policy influencing on care work and advocating for decent work for women in Africa. FEMNET will scale up the use of information technologies by investing in and supporting young women, girls, innovators, grassroots movements, and collectives to partner with women in media and women in the digital economy to fiercely advocate, and in particular for the ratification and the implementation of ILO Convention 190. So we'll continue working with trade unions, with cooperatives, and we'll also employ the same tactics that we used in the ratification of Maputo Protocol, which was the fastest protocol to be ratified on the continent. And we'll also work with allies and also the heads of state, including His Excellency President Ramaphosa, who spoke about championing Convention ILO 190. And we really want this to be linked with ending violence in the private, in the public, as well as the online sector, and making sure there are adequate resources to make sure that ILO C-190 on the continent is realized. The third one is we want to nurture and support African teenage feminists and work with them to attain meaningful engagement in teenage girls within the feminist movement and in policy processes. As a feminist organization, we know, as Audre Lorde said, there is nothing as a single issue. Struggle, there's nothing like a single issue struggle because we women do not live single life issues. So we believe economic justice will not be attained if we do not address climate change. We know it will not be attained if we don't decolonize these policy processes or secure sexual reproductive health and rights or prevent violence against women and girls. Importantly, we know generation equality can never be attained if girls and women with disability, non-binary persons are excluded. To this end, we will mobilize, will strengthen, will support intersectional feminist climate change movement in Africa, and will commit and continue mobilizing African women in all their diversity to demand their rights. And we'll also make sure that they're agitating for accountability to all these commitments which have been made, and commitments which should have been made in their respective countries. So the mantra, stop talking, start funding, will continue. We'll agitate for inclusive economies. It is possible as feminist activists. It is our audacity to disrupt. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the commitments from Femnet. I now want to appeal to my next speakers because we were doing well on time, but now we've slipped back. So I want you to kindly stick to the minutes that you are given, 4 minutes. Then you will be able to complete this in time. So I'd like now to invite Ms. Laura Waitas Thompson, is a youth leader and president of the organization Anma Anya Ula from Panama. Ms. Waitas, please go ahead.
The speaker speaks in an indigenous language, I believe. First of all, I would like to say hello to you in my indigenous language, and I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity of being in this panel where the youth is present for this historical moment. In order to change the economic system, we have to start giving possibilities to women in decision-making areas, from plans of action towards economic reactivation all the way to macro and micro businesses and banks and businesses, indigenous businesses in every sector at global level. It is necessary that the states, the civil society, international organizations include solidary economy in the state apparatus. There's a need for employment that improves on the economic and the education team so that the society does away with hurdles for women. It is necessary to make more flexible the conditions for funding for new entrepreneurs, for informal and including informal workers in indigenous communities that need seed capital and have to ask their seed capital to banks. We need to create leadership for women and women in the economy, in society, in politics, in employment and education, without leaving behind the traditional indigenous economy that hasn't had for years the recognition it deserves. We need to be able to reaffirm our identities. The pandemic showed us how strong our Mother Earth is. And all of the inequalities in the world where poorer countries have become poorer and the inequalities have become greater. I invite the richer countries to implement the right changes to free the poorer countries from the economic burden. This would reactivate the economy because we're demanding sacrifices from the women or from the youth, and we're deepening or widening the inequalities. And we all want an equitable world and a fair world. So to have a fair world, we need to give women possibilities for a green economy. That's the best platform for reaffirming human rights and indigenous rights. As an organization, ANJA, we commit ourselves to impulse and develop sustainable projects, respecting the visions, common visions, that are in line with our reality as an indigenous people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for inspiring words and commitments and for keeping within my time frame. Now, pleased to introduce our last speaker in this segment, and that is Ms. Rosa Lizard. Ms. Lizard is the co-convener for the Women's Working Group on Financing for Development. Ms. Lizard, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Winnie. The Women's Working Group on Financing for Development works towards macroeconomic solutions for women's economic justice through feminist analysis and a comprehensive financing for development approach. For the Generation Equality Forum, we are prioritizing advocating for a life of women and girls free of the burden of debt. We know the scope and gravity of the current crises disproportionately impact women and girls, and the COVID pandemic has unveiled a deep debt crisis for the Global South that exacerbates women's inequality and an increasing feminization of poverty globally. The implications of sovereign debt on the provisions of public services are dire. State spending on debt payments rather than on the provision of public goods and services is hurting women and girls in various dimensions. Through unpaid domestic and care work, women fill gaps in health, education, and other services that the state should guarantee. Austerity measures bring added pressure on women who are considered as shock absorbers of all the crises. It is in this context that we announced an advocacy commitment from debt sustainability to sustainable care. We commit to advocate for demands in relation to debt cancellation from a feminist perspective, promoting global solidarity and collective engagement. We commit to guarantee a debt sustainability that transforms into a holistic approach and that in turn considers the care economy as a systemic point of entry for women and girls, people on the planet, ensuring the sustainability of life itself. We commit to engage in a holistic manner with the challenges of the economic and financial global system, in particular in relation to the interconnections of debt, tax, trade, human rights, feminist economy, environmental integrity, and structural responses. We will engage with the diversity of actors on exchanges of knowledge, especially from social movements from the Global South and more impacted groups of populations faced with multiple discrimination. This debt sustainability for sustainable care commitment will grow beyond an initial 2-year implementation. We announced a second collective advocacy commitment initiated by the Action Nexus, together with 4 partners who share leadership in the Climate Justice and Economic Justice and Rights Action Coalition. This Action Nexus will grow over an initial 5-year implementation, supported by $500,000 to serve 2 key functions: the advocacy strategy rooted in a robust feminist economic justice blueprint, and 2, capacity building and networking for activists and grassroots women leaders to provide structural analysis for a robust intersectional agenda for feminist economic justice centered on care for people on the planet. Together with these commitments, the Action Nexus shares 3 new resources to frame these advocacy efforts. 1, a blueprint for feminist economic justice. 2, a brief on feminist decolonial global Green New Deal. And 3, a brief on human rights in the private sector. In conclusion, Madam Chair, I want to echo the voice of a young woman presenter from yesterday's opening who said, "I am Luisa," embodying the voice of millions of girls and young women who feel alone and abandoned by governments and institutions. Let's say their names. I am Luisa, I am Rosa. I am here to underscore the sentiments of millions of women and girls who were not able to participate here today. And we lament the enormous challenges that feminists with disabilities face and the exclusionary guidelines and measures in relation to accessibility to this forum, which kept gender not conforming, trans and intersex people and their organizations and many other structurally excluded groups left out of this space. Their lives resonate with the desire for freedom from want, of freedom from fear, of freedom to live from the burden of debt. Let us not steal their futures with debt burden.
Thank you.
Our hope is that the Generation Equality partners join us and wholeheartedly strive to achieve this for them and our humanity. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rosa. And I'm sorry when I interrupt some, just to make sure we get all our speakers. Thank you for the commitment. And as we come to the end of this section, I remain very, very excited about the range of commitments. Let me now move quickly to introduce our next speaker. This is another part now of the agenda where we've moved from the 4 areas now to commitment, from the leaders now to the commitment makers. I thank all of you. And I challenge all of us to be accountable to the women and girls on our commitments. I'm honored to welcome to the floor His Excellency, Mr. Philip Mpango, Vice President of the Government of Tanzania. Mheshimiwa, unayo sakafu. Karibu.
On behalf of His High Excellency Samia Suluhu Hassan, President of the United Republic of Tanzania, I wish to extend our appreciation to the French government and the UN Women for organizing this historic forum, which envisions a fair chance to economic development for all. Given the importance of economic justice and rights for realizing gender equality and economic empowerment, Her Excellency Samia Suluhu Hassan, President of the United Republic of Tanzania, has chosen to champion implementation of actions under this thematic area. I am humbled to announce Tanzania's 6 key commitments and concrete initiatives to make faster progress on economic justice and rights as follows. 1. Upscale national multi-sectoral child care programs and establish community-based child care centers at village level, workplaces and marketplaces. 2nd, to upscale investments in reliable water supply, rural electrification and renewable clean energy to ensure access to and use of affordable and relevant technologies to address multiple roles burden for women in rural and peri-urban areas. 3rd, to improve access and use of affordable and relevant technologies to increase women's capacity to produce competitive products in domestic, regional, and international markets. 4th, scale up investment in educational programs for girls, including establishment of girls' science schools, technology hubs, and vocational training centers in all regions in the country to impart requisite skill set and competencies for their effective engagement in modern economic activities. 5th, leverage digital technologies to promote competitive production and trading, to create dynamic value chains and reliable markets in agriculture, livestock keeping, mining development, and development of the blue economy and other sectors where women are mostly employed. And 6th, to promote financial inclusion through innovative approaches including application of electronic payment platforms, virtual savings and credit supply platforms. Madam Chair, the United Republic of Tanzania shall endeavor to allocate resources towards the implementation of these commitments. We also call upon partners from the whole spectrum of stakeholders to join us to ensure full and effective implementation of our commitments. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mheshimiwa Philip Pango, Vice President of the Government of Tanzania. It's a real commitment, and this time we're hearing from a country that is agrarian, where women live in rural areas. These are commitments ranging from women's access to credit to tackling the burden of unpaid care work through provision of water for domestic use, energy, and so on, and childcare at the community level. We thank you so much. These are so concrete and measurable. We wish you success. I now want to move on to commitment makers who will also deliver their commitment through video. We have, firstly, Ms. Karine Apoto, who is a youth representative working with the Youthwise Initiative of the OECD. Ms. Apoto speaks to how we can move towards an economic system and a world that works for women and men. After Ms. Apoto's video, we'll have another one where we'll hear from more commitment makers to this Action Coalition on Economic Justice and Rights. We will hear from the government of Ecuador, the government of Liberia, the government of Switzerland, an international network, WIGO, Women in Informal Employment. And then we'll hear from the government of Colombia. We'll hear from Idiot Newspaper, private company. We'll hear from the government of Uzbekistan, and we will hear from Unilever, a global business. We'll hear from Children's Investment Fund Foundation, philanthropy, and we'll hear from the government of the United States of America. After these 10 contributions, I will give my closing remarks. For now, please enjoy the videos.
Bonjour, je suis Karine.
My name is Karine. I'm a member of Youthwise at the OECD. As a young woman, we really want to kickstart the economies, and we want to make them more inclusive. And it's also important for me that young women and young girls have role models, strong personalities that you can look up to in all fields, in culture, in tourism, in sports, in businesses, and in politics too.
Pour faire un constat, parmi les pays de l'OCDE,
among the OECD countries, only 30% of elected representatives are women, which is really a sad reality. But now that we know this, it is important to think about measures that we can take to change the situation and to ensure that we can encourage women to assume high responsibility functions and roles. And I'd like also that our race towards growing and flourishing economies leads us to human-based economies, and we need to take into consideration the welfare and mental health of the younger generation, because these are factors that are not entirely taken into consideration these days. And I think also that we can also redistribute our resources better in order to confront the root causes of inequalities that have been exacerbated by COVID. For instance, the salaries given to caregivers, especially since the beginning of this pandemic, we've thought about this and we've seen this, and the fact that all of these caregivers are majority women, and they've taken on an enormous amount of work, and they must be considered at the level of their contributions to the economies. And I also think it's smart to do this in order to ensure the longevity of these sectors and these professions, and to make these professions more attractive for the future. And this is a means in which we can invest in the future generations.
Excelentísimo señor presidente de Francia, Emmanuel Macron.
Your Excellency, Mr. President Macron, Your Excellency,
México,
Mr. Andrés Manuel López Obrador, President of Mexico,
señor secretario general,
Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations,
distinguidas autoridades,
distinguished authorities,
líderes,
leaders, organizations, and activists from different countries of the world gathered today online and in person
de manera
in this world meeting.
y presencial. El pueblo y el gobierno
The people and the government of Ecuador congratulate the governments of Mexico and France for hosting the events and activities organized by the Forum Generation Equality.
Una iniciativa trascendental.
This is a cross-cutting initiative to unite efforts between two continents and extend the rights of women and of girls, making an urgent call for global action for gender equality and the promotion of human rights for women and girls.
La igualdad de géneros, a pesar de los esfuerzos, aún no.
Gender equality, despite all efforts, has not yet been achieved, and this has led to the reflection that the fight for human rights, especially women's rights, is not a task that concerns only women, but concerns the entire society,
y que además debe
and that furthermore must be addressed by all governments.
Como presidente del Ecuador,
as President of Ecuador, I am convinced that women's rights are human rights. Therefore, if a woman is attacked, we all suffer from it. And we turn into societies and countries that are less free, less fair, and morally tarnished. And even more so today than in the moments where we have been severely affected by the global health crisis caused by COVID-19. Ecuador is committed to joining forces on joining efforts with the objectives of the forum and among others, the promotion of coalitions for economic justice. Thank you very much to all of you.
On behalf of His Excellency George Manawia, President of the Republic of Liberia, he-for-she champion and our feminist-in-chief, I am pleased to reaffirm my country's pledge to join the Action Coalition's commitment makers to promote economic rights and justice. Presently, our women in cabinet positions account for 30%, promoting inclusive women participation. We've launched a $2 million rural women loan scheme to support vulnerable market women on a yearly basis. We provided, along with USAID, a stimulus package to support women businesses at a combined total of $13 million United States dollars. Training was provided for women entrepreneurs and women in agriculture, benefiting 100 women farmers, including the provision of seed funding startup grants of $5,000 for women cooperatives. Of 38,000 beneficiaries under the World Bank, International Fund for Agricultural Development, Smallholder Agriculture, Transformation, and Agribusiness Revitalization Project.
The interpreters are going to stop interpreting because this is an enormous amount of work for us and for our own protection. We're going to stop interpreting. We're turning off the mics now. Thank you.
They are instituting gender politics. Within the context of women, peace, and security, UNSCR 1325, our security sector have recruited more women in leadership positions, and our child justice systems account for 35.3% of women. With support from the World Bank, USAID, and UK Aid, we continue to give out cash transfers to female-headed households. Our gender-responsive planning and budgeting policy sets the pace for the Presidential Declaration of Tuition-Free Public Universities, which supports the enrollment and retention of women and girls in tertiary education. We believe that all critical components of promoting economic justice and rights are paramount women, along with decent work, fair wages, and safe working conditions. And to this, the government of Liberia is fully committed. Thank you.
Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, c'est avec grand plaisir que nous nous joignons comme porteurs d'engagement à la coalition sur la justice et les droits économiques. Il y a 50 ans,
Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, the interpretation will stop now.
elle représente plus de 40% de la chambre basse de notre Parlement et notre gouvernement fédéral est presque paritaire. Malgré tout, l'égalité n'est pas encore pleine et entière dans notre pays. C'est pourquoi notre gouvernement vient d'adopter sa toute première stratégie égalité 2030 qui inclut comme priorité l'autonomisation économique des femmes en Suisse et à l'étranger. Cette stratégie se concentre en particulier sur l'élimination de toute discrimination salariale dans les secteurs publics et privés et sur une participation équilibrée des femmes et des hommes sur le marché du travail, y compris au niveau décisionnel. Sur le plan national, nous mettrons à disposition d'ici à 2025 un montant de 22 millions de francs suisses pour des projets qui promeuvent l'égalité dans la vie professionnelle, avec un accent sur les mesures favorisant la conciliation entre les vies professionnelles, familiales et privées. Au niveau international, la Suisse se concentrera notamment sur la garantie des droits fonciers des femmes. Elle prévoit de renouveler sa contribution à la International Land Coalition, qui accorde une grande attention aux questions de genre dans le domaine foncier. La Suisse contribuera ainsi financièrement à garantir l'accès à la propriété foncière aux femmes. Il s'agit là d'un aspect essentiel pour renforcer leurs capacités et opportunités économiques. Mesdames et Messieurs, accélérer l'égalité dans la vie économique bénéficiera à toutes les générations. Nous en sommes convaincus. Je vous remercie et vous souhaite un forum inspirant.
WeGo enthusiastically commits to a collective effort to advance the recognition of 147 million women workers worldwide through a Homeworkers and Global Supply Chains platform. This is a critical moment. As the world rethinks global supply chains in the context of the devastating impact of COVID-19 and its implications for economic justice, homeworkers must be recognized as workers with rights. We were inspired to make this advocacy commitment to the Economic Justice and Rights Action Coalition because of the diversity of actors involved in catalyzing action to recognize in a meaningful way the essential role that homeworkers play in the global economy. We commit to bringing expertise in employment statistics, analysis of the linkages between gender, informal employment, and poverty, and support for collective voice through our steadfast partnerships with regional networks of home-based workers, the new HomeNet International, and other allies and partners. We expect this multi-stakeholder platform to bring to light workers and working conditions in global supply chains that have been invisible for far too long. We also expect concrete improvements in working conditions and a reduction in the number of women homeworkers living in poverty. Our work with this platform and with the Economic Justice and Rights Action Coalition will forge a more inclusive, enabling, and sustainable legal and policy environment for women workers across the world, and respond directly to the urgent call to accelerate global action in support of economic justice.
El Gobierno de Colombia, bajo el liderazgo de la vicepresidenta y canciller Marta Lucía Ramírez, felicita la iniciativa de Francia, México y de ONU Mujeres de convocar este foro Generación de Igualdad, que nos permite reiterar y renovar nuestro compromiso con el empoderamiento de las mujeres y la igualdad de género. En ese sentido, Colombia se compromete para agosto de 2022 a empoderar económicamente 1 millón de mujeres colombianas. Esto lo haremos a través de nuestra política de equidad de las mujeres y de la estrategia Colombia se reactiva con las mujeres. Para pasar a la acción, se formuló una directiva presidencial para implementar programas que cierren brechas de género en materia económica. Primero, más empleo para mujeres, en 3 sectores claves para la reactivación: infraestructura, sector minero energético y el sector de la construcción. Segundo, más emprendimiento de mujeres. Nuestra meta es consolidar a Colombia como una nación de mujeres emprendedoras. Hoy tenemos una política de Estado para lograrlo. Creamos el Fondo Mujer Emprende para financiar y formalizar emprendimientos femeninos. Establecimos criterios diferenciales para dinamizar la participación de empresas de mujeres en las compras públicas y se priorizó el uso de regalías del sector minero energético para proyectos de inversión con enfoque de género. Tercero, más mujeres STEM y ciudadanas digitales. La transformación digital del mundo va a marcha acelerada. Esto abre un universo infinito de posibilidades para las mujeres. Por eso, nuestro sello de equidad de género tiene el corazón el cierre de brechas digitales y la implementación de estrategias para que niñas y mujeres escojan profesiones STEM. Finalmente, asumimos el compromiso en 2022 de lograr la paridad de género en cargos directivos a nivel nacional y regional. Las mujeres somos el pilar del crecimiento económico sostenible y de la reactivación económica en América Latina y el mundo. Los gobiernos, en alianza con sector privado y sociedad civil, debemos avanzar en esa dirección. Sigamos trabajando juntos para lograr este objetivo, generación igualdad.
Herkese merhaba. Milliyet Gazetesi 1950 yılından beri yayın hayatında ve 1950 yılından bu yana geçen bütün zamanların içerisinde önceliği hep sosyal projeler, dezavantajlı grupların sıkıntıları, onların reel hayatın içerisinde yer alabilmelerini sağlayan projelerle geçti. Günümüzde bu kez nesiller boyu eşitlik forumu kapsamında çalışmak görevi çıktı. Kadınların ekonomik olarak güçlendirilmesi konusunda bir dizi taahhütte bulunduk. Önce dezavantajlı üniversite öğrencisi kızların güçlü liderler olarak yetiştirilmesini kapsıyor. 2026 yılına kadar 500 kız öğrencinin bu çerçevede yetiştirilmesi planlanıyor. Ekonomik adalet ve haklar eylemine destek çerçevesinde kadın girişimciler oluşturmak ve milliyetin mecralarını bu kadınların kullanımına açmak. Bir başka taahhüt, eşitlikçi hikayeler çerçevesinde kadın liderlerin rol modeli olarak öne çıkartılması ve onların hikayelerinin tüm toplum tarafından bilinmesinin sağlanması. Şimdi bütün bu çerçeve içerisinde eylem platformunun diğer taahhüt verenleri ve liderleriyle adım atmaya hazırız. Aranızda olmaktan mutluyuz.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, forum participants, allow me to greet all the participants of the Paris Forum Generation Equality. In Uzbekistan, providing gender equality is a priority of the state policy carried out under the leadership of President Shavkat Mirziyoyev. That is why, within the framework of the Action Coalitions, we made commitments in economic empowerment of women, improving reproductive health and eliminating gender-based violence. I would like to highlight briefly the measures being taken in Uzbekistan in these areas. First, legislative basis for the advancement of women was created in accordance with the requirements of international standards. The strategy for achieving gender equality until 2030 was approved. A procedure by which all legal acts undergo a review from gender perspective was introduced. Second, targeted work is underway to promote women to leadership positions. According to the recently published report of the Interparliamentary Union Women in Politics on the representation of women in Parliament, Uzbekistan took 45th place among more than 170 countries of the world. Third, particular attention is paid to the employment of women and to the support of women entrepreneurship. A concessional lending program to women entrepreneurs was launched. Fourth, efforts are underway on strengthening the reproductive health and mother and child health care. Pregnant women, breastfeeding mothers and children under 15 years of age are provided with vitamins and micronutrients free of charge. An in-depth medical examination of women, including cancer screening, is being carried out. Fifth, in accordance with the law on the protection of women from harassment and abuse, protection orders allowing women and girls to receive government protection are being issued. An extensive information and explanatory work is being carried out among the population. A hotline and information channels on social networks were launched for women survivors of domestic violence. A network of rehabilitation centers, shelters is developing. The program for providing housing for women in need is also being implemented. Dear friends, I would like to emphasize that we are ready to active cooperation with all countries of the world in the themes of the action coalitions that we have joined today. Thank you for your attention.
The COVID pandemic has highlighted and increased the inequalities that women and other marginalised communities around the world are facing. We've got to address the underlying systemic issues that are causing that inequality and ensure that we're economically empowering more women, helping to create a more resilient and sustainable society for the future. Although women make up 50% of the world's population and we own 35% of all businesses, we receive less than 1% of procurement spend from large organisations. So at Unilever, we've committed to increase our expenditure with diverse suppliers to at least €2 billion a year by 2025. We'll support women and other underrepresented groups through a new supplier development programme to help access to critical resources, finance, networking opportunities and skills. Will also help drive higher wages for all women working with our direct suppliers by mandating payment of a living wage. In addition, Unilever and Microsoft will mobilise $5 million to support and scale inclusive digital businesses that improve the lives and the livelihoods of women, because we know that the use of technology and innovation is key to accelerating the impact for women within the informal economy. While we collaborate, learn and support communities in our ecosystem, we also need to drive change within our own companies and organisations. So at Unilever, we're committing to rolling out a new gender equality framework created with the International Centre for Research on Women and in consultation with civil society. We'll systematically address the needs of women and girls across Unilever's entire ecosystem. We're excited to join a global movement and drive impact amongst millions of women, and that will transcend generations.
As the world's largest philanthropy, working specifically to improve the lives of children, we know that economic justice starts in the classroom. When girls have access to education and skills, they have pathways to income generation, a voice within their communities, and the agency to take independent decisions, including on motherhood and nutrition. We're thrilled to see education included in the Action Coalition Blueprint on Economic Justice and Rights, and I'm pleased to announce SIF's commitment to the Action Coalition, totaling at least $40 million over the next 5 years. Our commitment to economic justice and rights will support expansion of our Girl Capital portfolio in India, focused on transforming girls' education, skills, income pathways and leadership. Specifically, we have joined the British Asian Trust to launch the Skill India Impact Bond. This is the first skilling and employment bond to have a government body, in this case the Indian government's National Skills Development Corporation, as a risk investor. 25,000 girls will develop skills needed to enter meaningful employment, and we will monitor progress to ensure that over half of them pass the probationary employment period of 3 months. In addition, we will explore evidence-based approaches to tackling harmful gender norms and promoting girls' education in order to prevent child marriage, including through the Girls First Fund. Where women can learn, earn and lead, economies grow and nations advance. We look forward to working with you all to achieve this vision.
Women's economic security underpins our commitment
to advancing gender equity and equality. It is critical to women and their families and to broader economic stability, security, and growth. The COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated structural inequities in the workforce. Millions of women throughout the world have been forced to leave their jobs to care for their families. In the United States, it took just 1 year to wipe out 30 years of progress in women's labor force participation. This devastation has been and is reflected globally too. The global economy cannot reach its full potential when half of workers are either forced to leave their jobs or prevented from accessing good jobs. That's why the United States is making a range of commitments aimed at promoting women's economic security. This has been true from day one of the Biden-Harris administration. The American Rescue Plan, our first legislative package, makes historic commitments in child care and expands financial assistance to working families. We have also proposed the American Families Plan, a $1 trillion commitment to help cover the basic expenses that families care most about. It will make child care and higher education more affordable and continue to reduce child poverty and put money in parents' pockets. Critically, the Families Plan also proposes establishing a comprehensive national paid family and medical leave program, bringing the United States in line with much of the rest of the world. We also recognize that workforce development is critical to strengthening women's economic security. So the American Jobs Plan, the third package, calls for strengthening the workforce pipeline for more women and underserved communities to access in-demand jobs. This commitment includes ensuring jobs with fair and equal pay, safe and healthy workplaces, and workplaces free from discrimination and harassment. The United States is not the only country where women face unequal access to treatment in the labor force. In every country in the world, we know women earn less than men. In every country, they do more unpaid work. More than 100 countries have laws that inhibit women's economic participation and limit the types of jobs they can hold, property ownership, and access to capital. These obstacles not only impede women's economic security, they also undermine economic growth for everyone, everywhere. To advance women's economic security, we, the United States, we're mobilizing at least $12 billion over the next 5 years through the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. This is part of a new commitment to invest in businesses that advance gender equity in emerging markets and developing countries. These funds will go towards at least supporting 15 million women and girls, including women and girls from marginalized communities in fragile and post-conflict settings. The United States is also announcing the establishment of a technical assistance pilot program which will help private sector clients advance gender equity in their businesses. And we will continue to support gender-inclusive digital services for women-owned businesses through the U.S. African Development Foundation. We have also proposed $200 million for the newly established Gender Equity and Equality Action Fund, which will invest in women's economic empowerment as well as address the disproportionate impact that COVID-19 has had, as well as climate change and conflict and crisis on women and girls. This includes a special focus on addressing the root causes of migration. Relatedly, in Latin America, and in particular, we are investing in women's economic access and agency in the Northern Triangle and Central America, while supporting efforts to reduce gender-based violence in communities, workplaces, and households. In recognition of the importance of empowering grassroots and community-led organizations, we will promote women's entrepreneurship through targeted grants via the Inter-American Foundation, again, in Latin America. The U.S. is making these commitments because we know that gender equality is not only a matter of human rights, but also an economic imperative for the world. In the 21st century, we cannot afford to leave half of the population behind.
Thank you. Excellencies, participants, friends, thank you for joining us today for this very inspiring session. It's been so empowering to hear the commitments made by Action Coalition leaders and commitment makers. They were from a whole range of actors, from governments, private sector, civil society, trade unions, grassroots movements, youth movements, philanthropy, everyone. We have also seen the energy and enthusiasm through the chat, but we don't have time for me to give you a flavor of what was coming through the chat, but it will all be collated and shared as part of the report. I believe you can now see, let's see, on your screens, the Action Coalition Journey Map. There it is. I hope you can all see it. Please know that today's event is just the beginning of a long journey. The next 5 years will be pivotal to ensure these commitments change the lives of women and girls around the world. The Action Coalitions were launched in 2020. The actions were outlined and introduced both in Mexico and now in Paris, as you can see on the journey map. I urge you all, dear participants and speakers, to get involved in this opportunity. If you've made a commitment, let us start moving to action and impact. If you haven't made a commitment, it's not too late. Please make one. And let's hold each other accountable. I was one of the lucky ones who was in Beijing 25 years ago. And now we are taking that momentum forward. So I'm looking forward to 2026, inshallah, if I'm alive, when we can look back on the last 5 years and see a tangible, measurable difference in the lives of women and girls everywhere. It's about action. Thank you so much.